Namaskar and good evening to one and all. To the Dattopant Thekde Ji lecture series organized by Adivakta Parishad. It's an organization by the lawyers and for the lawyers. Today's topic of lecture is revisiting Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 in times of COVID-19. We are available live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Today's topic will be presented by Mr. Neeraj Kumar. He is a senior partner in DSK Legal Law and has a wide experience of practice in the area of corporate laws, mergers and acquisitions, corporate business restructuring, and commercial disputes. In the field of insolvency laws, Mr. Neeraj Kumar has represented various stakeholders, both financial and operational, promoters, resolutioner professionals, and bidders. He comes with a holistic perspective in the times of COVID-19 on issue pertaining to insolvency laws. Let us hear and welcome Mr. Neeraj Kumar.
Namaskar. Thank you, Vikrant.
Welcome, sir.
I would also like the organizers and the Parishad for giving me an opportunity to speak in this Dattopat Thengdi lecture series. It's an honor and a privilege. I understand that the audience comprise of lawyers as well as non-lawyers, and even among the lawyers, it ranges from the law students to the obviously senior professionals. And they all may not be equally conversant with the topic that I am going to touch upon. So I will try to keep the talk non-pedantic and non-technical. COVID-19, the disease that is caused by novel coronavirus, has brought the world to a standstill. There is a complete lockdown everywhere. And at a philosophical level, this virus is posing a very fundamental existential question to the humankind. The Greek philosopher Aristotle has described human beings as a social animal, whereas social distancing is what is being prescribed as a means to avoid contracting the virus. As you will appreciate that social distancing is a complete antithesis to being a social animal. Thus, the point I'm trying to make here is that this virus is impacting all lives, the whole humankind, at a very fundamental level, both in the private space as well as in public life. A good example of how the virus is impacting we lawyers in public life is if you look at the choice of topics that many speakers before me in this series have actually taken to address. For example, Mr. Luthra spoke about conducting criminal trials through video conferencing. And there was another speaker who spoke about lawyers in digital world. Now, the choice of topic itself clearly indicate that the profession is due for a change. Everything around us is going to change. We can speculate about the extent of the change, but definitely the change is going to come is a certainty. Continuing with the tradition of keeping the subject matter of the speech here topical and relevant, I have chosen to speak on the impact of coronavirus on the businesses generally, and that impact in turn necessitating a review of the insolvency and bankruptcy code. Now, that code is basically something which the whole economy has been grappling with, especially the stressed companies, how to address them for the past 3 years or so. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code came into being in the year 2016, towards the end of 2016. The law was seen as a game changer, and it actually turned out to be a game changer. the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code completely changed the way India has seen the resolution process being followed in the corporate world. Prior to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, all the resolutions or reconstructions that were pursued, whether under the Sikh Industries Companies Act, SICA, before BIFR, Board of Industrial Financial Reconstruction, or under the Companies Act, that provided for continuing with the exercise of restructuring with the debtor, that is the borrowing company or the management of the borrowing company, remaining in possession of the business. That means if I am a promoter of a company A and company A has borrowings from different lenders, and in case it's undergoing a restructuring, I remain in possession of company A, I remain in control of the affairs of company A, and that is how the restructuring was pursued. It was never thought that the company can survive without the promoter, that is me. So that was the thought process, how it was basically pursued, the restructuring was pursued prior to coming of this act. Whereas under the Insolvency Code, the restructuring is pursued with the philosophy of creditor in control. So the moment any reference, whether by a financial creditor or an operational creditor or by the company itself under the code, is made to NCLT, and that reference is allowed by NCLT, that marks the beginning of Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process, CIRP. The date it marks the beginning of CIRP, that very day, the powers of the board of the company is suspended. Individual professional by the name Interim Resolution Professional, IRP, who later gets confirmed as the Resolution Professional, RP, comes and is given the reins of the affairs of the company, and a committee of creditors constituting of the predominantly financial creditors is constituted to drive the whole process. So unlike what used to happen earlier, now from day one itself, the company is dispossessed of the old management, and it is put an onus, and the code also puts an onus on the old management to aid the resolution process. If any of the old management, be it the promoter or the KMP, that key managerial personnel, are acting in a recalcitrant manner, they will invite penal provisions under the code. So this is the fundamental change, and this was a very significant change as far as the whole issue of non-performing assets, which are the very large issue before economic issue before the government, how to address it. So this sea change in the whole attitude of recovery and reconstitution and restructuring was introduced by the Insolvency Code in 2016. So with the beginning of with the introduction of Insolvency Code, as I said, that any reference under the Insolvency Code can be made either by financial creditor or the operational creditor or the company itself. So a financial creditor is a person who has lent money to the company or who in a way has financed the affairs of the company. And a financial creditor, in case there is a default by the borrowing company in servicing the loan that it has been extended by the financial creditor, they can make a reference under Section 7 of the code to NCLT for the institution of the insolvency process. Similarly, an operational creditor is a person with whom the company has some business relations. For example, if I'm running a company and I have taken a premises on rent to run my office, so that landlord is my operational creditor. And in case I fail to make payment of the rent that I'm contracted to pay, then he can also institute a recovery proceedings, make a reference under Section 9 before the NCLT. Apart from that, it is also left open to the company itself or the management of the company or the promoter or the board of directors of the company itself to take necessary corporate actions, that is pass a board resolution or a chairman's resolution, and take the company under Section 10 before the NCLT, so that insolvency or the resolution process can be started on the company. Now, as I said, that the position under law with respect to how the resolution process is under IBC is very different from the earlier enactments. Now, what happens here is that when the process is being conducted on the company, it is basically expected to get over in a period of 180 days, and then you can seek extension of 90 days, and then it can move up to 330 days. I'm not getting into those issues because these are irrelevant to as far as my topic is concerned. So there are a lot of cases on the issues like how many days can it continue, and there is a judgment on those. But I'm not touching upon that. What is relevant is that the process is a time-bound process, and it is conducted by an independent professional, that is the resolution professional. While conducting as a part of the resolution process, it is also enjoined on the resolution professional to carry out a transaction audit on the company so as to identify any preferential transaction that has taken place in the company in the past 2 years, any undervalued transaction that has taken place in the company in the past 2 years, any extortionate transaction that has taken place in the company in the past 2 years, or any fraudulent transaction that has taken place in the past 2 years. Now, the idea is that if the promoter or the management of the company which has made reference, for example, under Section 10, after defrauding the company, then obviously such defrauding of the company should be made good by the past management, and that anyway is the process to be followed even under Section 7 reference or Section 9 reference. So this transaction audit is part and parcel of the.
Excuse me, sir. Sorry to disturb you. Sir, sorry to disturb you.
Yeah.
Sir, your voice is cracking. I would request you to please use a earphone or something so that the viewers are able to hear you.
Vikrant, but I do not have a. I will have to log in from my phone then.
Sir, I believe now it is coming better. When I was here, it is coming better. Let us try again. Thank you, sir.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully now I'm audible now, Vikrant. Hello?
Yes, sir. Please go on.
Okay, sure. So, as I said, in the earlier scheme of things, the continuation of a business of the company dehors the promoter or the past management or the incumbent management was something which was unthinkable. Thus, what used to happen is the company either used to bite the dust and the promoter used to survive, or basically the company used to, with a lot of haircut for the stakeholders, used to continue the business under the stewardship of the same management. Whereas under the IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, as the old management is dispossessed of the asset on day one, and then the process is run, there is a very large likelihood, there is a preponderance of the probability that the company may change hands, and that the company will continue its business. That is what the thrust of the resolution process is, whether the current management is able to come back in the control or not. When the IBC was brought in the year 2016, then there was no disqualifications with respect to the who can actually bid for the asset when as a part of the insolvency process. So as I said, that process is being run by the resolution professional under the guidance of the COC or under the supervision of the COC. And as a part of the process, the asset of the company, the business of the company is showcased to the world at large. The suitors are solicited to come and bid for the company. and the people who participate in the bid are known as prospective resolution applicants. And the successful resolution applicant is successful bidder is the who is basically turns out to be H1 bidder. He is basically known as resolution applicant. That is the term used in the enactment. Now, what happened is that within a year of the code coming into being, there was an amendment by way of a notification brought in the November 2017, which basically barred a certain class of people from bidding in the resolution process. And this was later made into Amendment Act, and basically that saw the introduction of Section 29A in the code. The section, if you look at the parliamentary debate around the time this amendment was being debated in the parliament, and if you look at the statement made by late Sri Arun Jaitley ji in defense of the amendment, then two things stands out. One is he has spoken about a company where the lending is disproportionate to the hard assets of the company. These are basically trading companies. For example, you can have a rice mill company, which if you look at the value of the rice mill where the business operations takes place, it will be insignificant. Whereas the business loans, basically CC limit, that is credit limit taken for business, that is current account limit, that will be much larger than what the hard asset the company has. Such trading companies, normally their asset is the receivables of the company, which are not hard assets, but these are basically contractual claims that the company has against the supplies that they have made. So Jaitley ji pointed up about such companies. And secondly, his second leg of argument in defense of the proposed amendment was that what do you do with the promoters who have been the cause of the decline of the business or the cause of this NPA or the non-performing asset itself? Do you allow them to benefit from the operation of this? With these arguments, basically, with these objectives in mind, that amendment was brought in. So that Section 29A effectively barred a certain set of people, among them, from bidding in the resolution process. Among them, one was obviously people like who have been undischarged insolvent. Second are who are willful default. And the one tricky one that was incorporated there was promoter of a company which has an NPA account which is more than 1 year old on the date on which he's making the on the date he's trying to make the bid for the company which CRP has, which is undergoing CRP. That basically means if A is the promoter, B is the company, and B has borrowings from the different bankers, and that lending to company B has become an NPA, and it is more than a year old, that classification of the NPA is more than 1 year old, then A, the promoter of company B, cannot bid in the insolvency process either of the company B or in any other insolvency process going on in any other company. So he's barred from bidding not only for his own company, but he's barred from bidding from the entire ecosystem of the lending business. So this was the disqualification which was introduced. Another one was that anybody who has given guarantee for a company which is undergoing insolvency, and that guarantee has been invoked and not stand satisfied. So basically, if you look at the lending culture of this country, what happens is that a banker, when he's lending to a company A, then he will also expect a personal guarantee from the promoters of the company. So it is also on the basis of the assurances of the promoter that the lending is done to the company. So in case the principal borrower has defaulted and the guarantor has also defaulted, and then this defaulting guarantor is also barred from participating in the CIP process. And he is barred from participating in the CIP process, as I said, from the entire ecosystem of the of the economy. So he cannot bid for the company that he is running or he was running, or of the company that he want to actually bid for in the market. Now, if you look at the rationale of the introducing 29A, that was the predominant view of the policymakers at that point of time, and also the expression of the predominant sentiments at that point of time. That was the time when 12 large accounts were referred by Reserve Bank of India. And Reserve Bank had advised the bankers to refer those 12 large accounts to NCLT for insolvency resolution. Now, which is popularly in the popular press known as Dirty Dozen. This included SR Steel, Monet Ispat, Bhushan Power, Bhushan Steel, and so on and so forth. Amtek Auto, Atul, Alok Industries, JP Infratech. So these were very large borrowers, and they have been in default for a while. And more importantly, all these accounts have already undergone some kind of a restructuring, the beneficial restructuring mechanism that were available prior to the IBC itself, like the corporate debt restructuring or strategic debt restructuring, what we call CDR, SDR. So these accounts, some have undergone only CDR, some have undergone both CDR as well as SDR. And effectively, despite all the concessions that this system, the lending system, could have extended to these accounts under the then management has not been able to redeem themselves, and that remained a non-performing asset. With this backdrop, and with such a large amount of money at stake, the popular sentiment was that it should not happen. The new code with which which was recently introduced in the economy or in the country should not give a result, should not have an outcome which basically benefits the delinquent themselves. So with this thought process, this 29A was introduced. Now, having given the broader conspectus of how the Insolvency Act basically, I'm talking only from the control perspective, because that is where basically I will be talking further in the in this talk. So after giving all the broader conspectus of the control from the control perspective of the IBC, Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, I will now move on to the basic issue of how this coronavirus is fundamentally impacting the business environment and why that should be a trigger for us to look at revisiting the provisions of the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code. The disruption caused by the coronavirus is very well known. We all are locked down, and today we are having this to use this digital platform for this kind of conversation or this kind of speech or this kind of a lecture series is itself indicating how things have changed. Earlier, we could have all gathered at ILI or some other place and we would have actually shared our thoughts face to face on such issues. So this lockdown obviously has a very immediate impact on the economy. But what is more unnerving and what is more confounding to everyone is how the economy will reboot itself once this lockdown is basically lifted, or in the phased manner that lockdown will be lifted. How will be the life after corona? So basically, in economic terms, if you look at what is being written by economists in the newspapers or in the publications, so people are saying that this coronavirus in economic terms or the business terms will be known as a pre-corona, before corona, that is BC, and after corona. We will have a life before corona and after corona. as far as the economic life is concerned. So we expect a lot of new normals to come into our life. For example, social distancing. If that is the new normal, it is very difficult to fathom how courts will function. Uh, then looking at everything from the sanitation, for example. So while arguing our cases, we at times try to send across a document or the Bare Act across the bar to the judges, but maybe the document or the document may be dismissed in the proceedings on account of not properly getting sanitized. Similarly, judges may be apprehensive of taking anything across the bar. Now, this small behavioral change, as I'm talking about the lawyers and the legal profession, will also have similar consequences in the industries as well. For example, we do not know how airlines industry will operate after Corona is basically over or the lockdown is over. How social distancing will be practiced in a cinema hall, for example. So all this is completely unknown to us. It's very difficult to extend or gauge the impact of it. So all this basically will require all the business leaders to rethink and re-strategize their businesses. And this rethinking and re-strategizing may also require some kind of legislative protection so that they can basically reinvent or they can reinvent their businesses. Now, it is not that the government is not mindful of their duty and they have not responded to this unique situation. They have already come out with a slew of measures. Like RBI has already tweaked their monetary policy and they have tried to improve the liquidity in the market. Similarly, I believe government is working on a very large bailout package, especially keeping agricultural sector and MSME in focus. And as a stopgap arrangement, what RBI has also put a moratorium on the classification of the NPA. Similarly, government has also gone ahead and put a lockdown on the initiation of insolvency and bankruptcy code. I believe cabinet has already recommended for a 6-month moratorium on any initiation under the insolvency and bankruptcy code, and which is awaiting presidential essay. And that this is supposed to be a stopgap arrangement. However, what I am basically advocating here using this platform is government should look at a partial lifting of the complete lockdown on the insolvency and bankruptcy code. As I said, that a reference under the code can be made by a lender under Section 7, by an operational creditor under Section 9, and by the company itself under Section 10. So, for example, a company has a business case of revival, then ideally they should be allowed to make a reference under Section 10, even today, or when the even in this 6-month duration or going forward. And this, that reference obviously should be slightly tweaked as a because this is a completely different scenario than what we had around the time when Section 29A was introduced. Today, the businesses need help from the government. They need the protection from the government, and that protection can also be accorded to them under the legislation as well. So, what is my thought process is that companies should be allowed to make a reference under Section 10 with a slight tweak that instead of they being dispossessed of their business, they should allow to continue with their businesses, and the process should be run with a slight tweak where after the transaction audit, in case no delinquency of a preferential transaction or a fraudulent transaction or a undervalued transaction has taken place in the company, then the management should be allowed to continue with the business with similar kind of concessions that would have been available if some third party is going to bid for the company. This will go a long way in protecting the interest of the businesses, and also not only the promoters, but also that means a protection of the value for the lenders. The best value that the lenders can get today is by sticking to the people whom they have put their money on. So this tweak is something that government should look at and allow Section 10 references. With this, I am done with the topic, and I will invite any questions if you people have any questions. Vikrant? Yeah, hi Vikrant. So I'm done with what I had to say. I will, if there are
Okay,
any questions, you can just let me know,
okay, sir. Now, let me take some questions.
please.
Just a second, sir. Maybe an internet problem coming up. I'll just reconnect and get question.
Sure.
Sir, first question is whether PCA applies against RP oblique COC.
Well, COC constitute of the lenders. And in case the lenders are banks, obviously, then in such cases, the Prevention of Corruption Act definitely squarely applies on them. As regards the RP, RP is a creature of the act, and he is kind of officer of the court. I'm not very sure whether he will be covered or not, but my view is that he should ideally be covered by a Prevention of Corruption Act.
Sir, next question is if longer time is given to financial debtor owing to present COVID situation, will it result in better recovery?
So the debtor, as I said, that these are strange times, and more importantly, we do not know what is there in store for us in future. So as a part of, when I said that the Section 10 reference should be allowed to the companies, what basically will happen in that Section 10 reference is that only promoters who are basically clean, or who do not have any skeletons in the cupboards, they will only make the references. And secondly, while pitching for that Section 10 reference, they will also make a business case how their business after restructuring will basically address the will benefit the stakeholders, including the lenders. So if a longer duration is allowed to them, obviously it will be beneficial for them to reorganize themselves, and obviously it should yield in a better recovery to the lenders.
Sir, the third question is there an increase in default threshold amount in 2016 code owing to present situation and the effects of same on insolvency process?
Right. So earlier the threshold was 1 lakh rupees, but a recent amendment in the act, basically recently done after the COVID, has raised the threshold to 1 crore.
Sir, next question is, what role can technology play in completion of insolvency process during situation present times without causing any delay?
So technology can play a very big role to avoid delays in such cases where uh, the assets of the company has already been evaluated physically by the prospective bidders. For example, a power company or a power manufacturing company that is undergoing resolution and the power plant has already been inspected by the prospective bidders, then obviously rest of the work can be done using the way we are interacting today. The COC can actually meet through video conferencing. Even the bids submission etc can be done electronically, and the COC can basically vote and consummate the transaction after negotiating with the bidders electronically. Uh, After that, basically, what will happen is that that process requires a confirmation of the COC meeting by the NCLT, and that may take place. I mean, you can always do the electronic filing in NCLT, but actually your file gets scrutinized, etc. after you've done the physical filing. But at least the process, to the extent of getting the COC approval, can be carried out. However, in cases where the process has just started and the suitors are yet to, I mean, the prospective resolution applicants are still to inspect the physical assets of the company, in such cases, digitally, not much progress can be
Sir, could you please elaborate a bit on moratorium in IBC proceedings during these times?
made. Sure. So, the cabinet, what the proposal from the cabinet is that no company can be taken to NCLT for a default in the next 6 months under the insolvency bankruptcy code. So basically, there is complete bar on a financial lender, financial creditor, or an operational creditor to take any company to insolvency in this duration till when the moratorium is applicable.
Sir, the next question is, what is recourse for a creditor who fails to submit his claim after the resolution plan is accepted by NCLT and further halted because of COVID situation at NCLT?
Well, the window to the creditor is only available till the COC has not voted on the plan. So even prior to the reference to NCLT itself, where I believe in your case, basically NCLT has already approved the plan. So window has long closed for the creditor. So he won't be having any recourse, notwithstanding the COVID.
So the next question is, what effect will suspension of laws and process will have if they are suspending during crisis situation? So should I repeat?
Yeah, please, yeah.
What effect will suspension of laws and process will have if they are suspended during crisis situation?
Difficult to follow the question. So I understand what effect will suspension of laws. When you say laws and process, you mean the IBC code and the
Insolvency laws.
insolvency resolution process will have if they are suspended during crisis. So, well, not much of clarity on this, but I believe that the process which is underway, which is already underway, will continue because this suspension will not have a suspension on the process being which is already underway. It will have impact. The moratorium will have impact only on fresh cases. So no. So how it will operate is that no fresh cases will be admitted in NCLT or no fresh references can be made to NCLT. But the process which are already underway will continue as it is, unless until the COC decides to withdraw it with a 90% vote which is basically available to the COC in the wake of a bad market scenario.
So the next question is, what are major challenges in which insolvency side practitioners going to face due to COVID-19 effect?
Difficult to opine on this because that will largely depend upon what processes are being adopted by the courts, including NCLT, post-COVID, how they are basically listing the matters, whether there will be advance notice for everybody to come at a particular time so that there are not enough crowd in the courts, because as you know, all NCLTs across India are very crowded places, and lawyers are struggling to reach and address the bench. So I don't think that is something that will be allowed any further. I understand that there will be processes put in place which will basically ensure that not much of I mean, to basically avoid assembly of large number of lawyers at one point of time. So will depend upon how basically the NCLT will start the physical hearings.
Thank you, sir. You have been most enlightening. I thank you for the insights which you have given in this COVID-19 situation, and I thank all the viewers who have come here to watch this Dattopant Thekde ji online lecture.
Thank you, Vikrant.